The following teaching is by Jim Pugh through the ministry of God is Government. If you have never listened to one of our Bridge of Truth podcasts and wish to see all the topics taught through this Bridge of Truth ministry, please go to www.godisgovernment.com to find the inventory of Bridge of Truth podcasts. Now, welcome Jim Pugh as he presents another historical study of truth from history, Bible scripture, or current events.
We pick up the story of Cecil John Rhodes' rise to cabal glory as he traveled back and forth from South Africa to England until the time of his graduation from Oxford in 1881. By then, he had acquired claims to over 40 diamond mines in Kimberley. Throughout the next 7 years, he continued to purchase mine after mine. Ignoring safety rules, disaster struck in March 188, when 178 African laborers and 24 white miners perished, and one of his most profitable mines collapsed. After the disaster, he returned to London to seek funding from N.M. Rothschild and Sons for the takeover of the remaining mines in Kimberley, including Compagnie Française, a company that owned a multitude of diamond-rich claims. By the time of Rhodes's arrival, N.M. Rothschild and Sons, under Lord Nathan Rothschild, possessed complete control of the Bank of England, which regulated the country's currency. It was Nathan Mayer Rothschild that stated in 1815, "I care not what puppet placed on the throne of England to rule the empire. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply." The Rothschild performed this task simply by printing or burning the paper money. They increased the money supply to promote prosperity and decreased the supply to prevent inflation. These manipulations were based on the distinction between money and good. Good were the real wealth that a person possessed, while money remained only a person's claim on the wealth that was being retained by someone or something else like a bank. This is no different in our current economy. The same practice has been followed for the past several hundred years. Goods were tangible assets, while money represented a statement of the debt that was owed to the holder. The use of money rather than goods as payment for a transaction dated back to the creation of the Bank of England in William Paterson, a retired pirate, in 1694. Paterson alleviated his customers of the burden of transferring heavy bags or chests of gold for business transactions by producing paper certificates, which entitled the bearers to exchange them for gold upon demand. Thanks to the convenience of paper, only a small fraction of certificate holders ever sought redemption in the precious metal. Paterson quickly realized that they only needed to keep enough gold in hand to cover the fraction of certificates presented as payment. The rest of the gold could be used to mount a myriad of public and private ventures, including the building of ships and the waging of war. The excess volume, which rose to 90%, of the paper claims against reserves became known as banknotes, as an economic miracle had been performed. The issuance of paper claims greater than the gold at hand meant that the Bank of England was creating most of its money out of nothing, a practice that eventually became adopted by the other central banks in existence at the time of Rhodes' meeting with Rothschild, viz., Swedish Riksbank, Banco de España, Bank de France, Bank of Finland, de Nederlandse Bank, Norges Bank, Oostenrijkse Nationalbank, Danmarks Nationalbank, Banco de Portugal, National Bank of Belgium, Bank of Indonesia, German Reichsbank, Bulgarian National Bank, National Bank of Romania, Bank of Japan, and the National Bank of Serbia. When the Rothschild took control of the Bank of England in 1815, they did so from acts of stealth activities. At the Battle of Waterloo, Nathan, Natty as his friend called him, Rothschild, Lord Nathan Rothschild's grandfather, founded the British forces under the Duke of Wellington, while Jacob Rothschild funded the French army under Napoleon. Receiving preliminary news from his couriers that Wellington had won the battle, Natty Rothschild appeared at the London Stock Exchange in a feigned mood of depressed and commenced selling his British bonds. This started a chain reaction. Traders en masse unloaded their bonds at rock-bottom prices to buyers who were shills from the Rothschild family. When news arrived that Wellington had actually won the battle, Natty had received a 20-to-1 return on his investment. This forces England, now the financial hub of the world, to set up a new Bank of England with the Rothschilds as principal shareholders. The involvement of the Rothschild in American history dates back to 1791, when the banking family became the principal shareholders of the First National Bank of the United States, thanks to the efforts of Alexander Hamilton, their agent in the Washington cabinet. America's first central bank produced the country's currency and became the sole provider of loans, all interest-bearing, to the federal government. In 1796, the American government had borrowed $8.2 million from the central bank, and prices on consumer goods rose 72%. Mayor Amschel Rothschild, the head of the banking family, demanded partial payment of the loan, which the government, under Thomas Jefferson, could provide by selling all of its shares in First National Bank. In this way, the bank became 100% privately owned, with 75% of its shares held by the Rothschilds and other foreign bankers. In 1811, when the Rothschild charter for the First National Bank was set to expire, Natty Rothschild, the new head of the charter, issued this order. Either the application for renewal of the charter is granted, or the United States will find itself in a disastrous war. But the members of Congress refused to buckle under this threat and voted against the renewal. The outcome of the charter refusal was the War of 1812. The War of 1812 erupted because of Britain's attempts to restrict trade between the United States and France, and the impression, the seizing and forcing into service of U.S. seamen into the Royal Navy. The Rothschilds' role in creating such policies remains unknown, but the banking family nevertheless provided the British government with loans without interest for the war effort. At the end of the struggle, America may have won its second war of independence, but the country was left with a huge war debt of $105 million relative to a population of 8 million. Faced with this financial burden, Congress approved the creation of the Second Bank of the United States in 1816. To no one's surprise, the Rothschilds emerged as the major shareholders. If you think the United States won the War of Independence or the War of 1812, you need to go review your history. The United States won neither. What we have been told through our formal education and through propaganda is a lie. Nicholas Biddle, the point man to James Rothschild, was appointed president of the Second National Bank of the United States, which opened a string of branches in every major city within the United States. These branches extended loans to businessmen, banks, farmers, and settlers who wished to purchase land in the American West. In 1819, the Second Bank drastically reduced the money supply. Loans were no longer available. Thousands of Americans suddenly discovered they were unable to pay off their bank debts. Farmers were forced into foreclosure. Businesses went belly up. Speculators and settlers lost their lands and savings. The widespread financial disaster and depression, which provided popular resentment against banking and business enterprises, enabled the shareholders of Second National, namely the Rothschilds, to purchase enormous assets at greatly depressed prices. In 1828, Andrew Jackson ran for president with the slogan, "Jackson and no bank." The slogan was in keeping with his plan to seize control of the currency and to end the profiteering of the Rothschilds as soon as he assumed the oath of office. Jackson began to withdraw government money from the second bank to deposit it in state banks. This action prompted the Rothschilds to contract the money supply and to create another depression. Jackson, who was known for his fiery temper, responded by swearing, "You are a den of thieves and vipers, and I intend to rout you out. If the people understood the rank injustices of our money and banking system, there would be a revolution before morning." Jackson did, in fact, have his way. Rout the Rothschilds, Jackson did. On September 10th, 1833, Jackson revoked the charter for the Second National Bank of the United States, 5 years before it was set to expire. In defense of his action, Jackson condemned the legislation that brought the bank into existence by saying, "The act seems to be predicated on an erroneous idea that the present shareholders have a prescriptive right, not only the favor, but the bounty of the government. For their benefit, does this act exclude the whole American people from competition in the purchase of this monopoly? Present stockholders and those inheriting their rights as successors established a privileged order, clothed both with great political power and enjoying immense pecuniary advantages from their connection with government. Should its influence be concentrated under the operation of such an act as this, in the hands of a self-elected directory whose interests are identified with those of the foreign stockholders, will there not be cause to tremble for the independence of our country in war, controlling our currency, receiving our public monies, and holding thousands of our citizens' independence? It would be more formidable and dangerous than the naval and military power of the enemy. It is to be regretted that the rich and powerful too often bend the acts of government for selfish purposes, to make the rich richer and more powerful. Many of our rich men have not been content with equal protection and equal benefits, but have brought us to make them richer by acts of Congress. I have done my duty to this country." On January 30th, 1835, Richard Lawrence, an English immigrant, attempted to shoot President Jackson in front of the Capitol building. His pistol misfired, and the president clubbed Lawrence to the ground with his cane. This would-be assassin was deemed mentally unsound and confined to an asylum for the criminally insane. Jackson said that the Rothschilds were responsible for the attempt on his life, and Lawrence insisted that he had been commissioned to commit the murder by a group of powerful people in Europe. Despite the setback in America with President Jackson terminating the Second National Bank charter, the Rothschilds continued their global expansion by establishing financial ties to such countries as Austria, Germany, Russia, Italy, France, Egypt, China, South Africa, China, India, New Zealand, and Australia. In the process, they established close relations with other Khazarian Jewish banking families, including the Cohens, Warburgs, Schiffs, Kuhn, Loebs, Lazards, Lehmans, and Goldmans. These families worked together, shared resources, and engaged in joint business ventures. They shared a common Khazarian Jewish heritage, maintained close social ties, and often intermarried. Natty Rothschild married the oldest daughter of Levi Barrett Cohen, a prominent financier. Jacob Schiff, who lived with the Rothschilds, moved to America and married the daughter of Solomon Loeb, the head of the Kuhn-Loeb banking dynasty. He, two daughters of Marcus Goldman, married the sons of Samuel Sachs for Goldman Sachs. Paul Warburg left Hamburg for New York, where he married Nina Loeb, the daughter of Solomon Loeb. United by blood, marriage, and ethnicity, they provided funding to American businessmen and industrialists, including Andre Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan. In this way, they created a money cartel that has become the most powerful force on planet Earth. Even though Rhodes and all the Khazarian Jewish banking cartel were Freemasons and members of the same social clubs in London, Rhodes was not acquainted with Lord Nathan Rothschild, even though the banker was the major shareholder of De Beers. one of the largest diamond mines in Kimberley. Lord Rothschild was not easily approachable. He was described by his contemporaries as aristocratic, haughty, fiercely conservative, and unbearably rude. Yet Rothschild was beguiled by Rhodes and provided High with the funding not only to purchase all the diamond mines in Kimberley, but also to develop what Rhodes called the simply endless gold fields that existed beyond the Limpopo River in Matabeleland. Rothschild's beguilement was coupled with his realization that Rhodes and his society could be instrumental in achieving the following objectives for his banking family. 1. The creation of a Jewish homeland. 2. The reestablishment of a central bank in America. By November 1888, the relationship between the two men had grown so close that Rhodes drafted a new will in which he named Rothschild the sole beneficiary of his estate. This raises the question, why would Rhodes bequeath his fortune to the world's wealthiest financier? The answer resides in the codicil to the will which instructed Rothschild to use the wealth accumulated by Rhodes to establish a British secret society as a counterpart to the Kimberley Club that Rhodes dubbed the Society of the Elect was to be modeled after the Society of Jesus, which St. Ignatius Loyola had established in 1544, and Rhodes in the codicil requested Rothschild to take the constitution of the Jesuits, if obtainable, and insert the English Empire for the Roman Catholic Church. Going back in history a bit to see how all this fits, we need to go back to 1540 when the Society of Jesus began. 6 men under the leadership of Ignatius Loyola met in secret to create a religious military order devoted to waging was against unbelief and apostasy. The Jesuits were obliged to relinquish their individual wills so that they could be moved about like corpses by the provincial generals. By the time of Loyola's death in 1556, the order had 3,500 members living in 130 houses in 18 countries and 100 colleges. Through Herculean efforts, the Society of Jesus had turned back much of the Protestant tide, recapturing much of Germany, most of Hungary and Bohemia, and all of Poland. The fact that the Jesuits accomplished so much in so little time convinced Rhodes that his secret society, thanks to modern advancements in transportation and communication, could produce even greater results under the dominance of the English race and religion. The task was advanced by Rothschild, who attracted a host of influential aristocrats to the newly dubbed Society of the Elect, including Lord Reginald Balliol Brett, Queen Victoria's closest advisor, Lord Archibald Primrose, the 5th Earl of Rosebery and Rothschild's son-in-law, who would serve as Britain's Prime Minister from 1894 to 1895, and Arthur James Balfour, 1st Earl of Balfour, who would become the British Prime Minister from 1902 to 1905. Rhodes' ties topped these 3 men would become tightened by their shared homosexuality and their preference for burly, blue-eyed boys. Among the other recruits were Albert Lord Grey and Robert Armstrong Yates, 2 prominent members of the British Parliament, William Palmer, the 2nd Earl of Shelbourne, and Alfred Milner, Under Secretary of Finance in Egypt. Milner, who was also of questionable sexual orientation, merits special mention. Rhodes recognized in him the kind of steel that was required to pursue the dream of world domination. I support Milner absolutely without reserve. If he says peace, I say peace. If he says war, I say war. Whatever happens, I say ditto to Milner. It is here that American destruction took shape from the minds of depraved individuals. Returning to Kimberley with funding from Rothschild, Rhodes purchased every diamond field in South Africa, including those owned by Barney Barnato, who had been one of his fiercest competitors. By 1889, he had gained control of 90% of the world's diamond trade and established the De Beers Consolidated Mining Company. Young men so smitten by their sweethearts that Hay pledged their troth by purchasing a tiny chip of crystalline carbon now, almost inevitably, contributed to the Rhodes fortune. Fortune continued to smile upon Rhodes. He bought up the farms of dirt-poor Boers outside Johannesburg. As luck would have it, a few 100 feet under the dirt, the world's richest and deepest seam of gold was unearthed. Thanks to Rothschild, Rhodes was granted a charter for his British South Africa Company. The charter provided him with almost limitless power over tracts of unconquered lands, including Mashonaland and Matabaland, a mass of land the size of Spain, France, and the Low Countries, which became known as Rhodesia, and Nyasaland, now known as Malawi. Rhodes was now rich beyond measure and powerful enough to transform the course of human history.
You have been listening to Bridge of Truth, brought to you by biblical teacher and author Jim Pugh with God is Government. For free access to all of Jim Pugh's Bridge of Truth podcast, please go to www.godisgovernment.com. Distribution of the Bridge of Truth and all other teachings are available for worldwide distribution. Thank you for joining us in this broadcast of Bridge of Truth.